The room was thick with tension, the kind that electrifies every corner of a debate hall. The air was heavy with words unsaid, thoughts suppressed, and eyes glued to the stage. Cameras flashed, capturing every second of the confrontation between Bill Barr, the former Attorney General, and Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett. For weeks, this moment had been building, a clash of ideologies, personalities, and power. Barr, his posture rigid, his jaw set in a grimace, had been speaking over her, dismissing her every point with arrogance. But Crockett, calm and unwavering, stood her ground, speaking truth to power in the only way she knew how, directly, without hesitation, without fear. Then it came. A moment that would stop the entire room. Bill Barr, his patience at its breaking point, slammed his fist on the podium, his voice cutting through the murmur of the crowd, "That's enough." The words hung in the air like a storm cloud. His face, flushed with rage, eyes narrowing with contempt. He was a man used to controlling the narrative, used to silencing those who dared challenge him. But in that moment, something unexpected happened. Crockett didn't flinch. She didn't bow her head in submission or cower in the face of his fury. Instead, she stood tall, unshaken, and locked eyes with Barr. A hushed silence fell over the room. Everyone was waiting for the next move, waiting for what the Congresswoman would do. This was the moment where Barr thought he had won, where he believed his outburst had crushed her. But what happened next left America speechless. Crockett's response would echo across the nation, a ripple that would soon reverberate far beyond the walls of the debate hall. And as Barr's smug smile slowly faded, the camera zoomed in on her, capturing the calm confidence on her face. The world held its breath, wondering, what would she say next? But no one was prepared for what came. The silence in the room felt suffocating, as if the entire nation was holding its breath, suspended between past injustices and the uncertain future. In that charged moment, Bill Barr wasn't just an ex-attorney general on a stage, he symbolized the old guard of power, the very establishment that had fought to protect its interests at all costs. His tenure in the Trump administration had been marked by controversial decisions that many believed undermined justice, from his handling of the Mueller report to his defense of policies that favored the rich and powerful. His actions were a constant reminder of how far the political system had strayed from the ideals it claimed to uphold. To many, Barr was the embodiment of everything wrong with Washington, a man who used his position to silence truth, bend the law to his will, and maintain the status quo. But Jasmine Crockett was different. She had risen in the political world like a storm, her voice echoing the frustrations of millions who had been left behind by a system rigged in favor of the few. She wasn't a product of the establishment, she was a product of struggle, of hard-won victories in the face of adversity. As a child of immigrants, a fierce advocate for racial justice, and a champion for those who had been silenced for far too long, Crockett represented the hope that change was not only possible but imminent. Her ascent wasn't just personal, it was a symbol of the shift happening in America, a shift toward inclusion, fairness, and accountability. Every speech she gave, every position she took, seemed to echo the values of a new generation, one that was tired of playing by a broken set of rules. Crockett didn't just want to win, she wanted to change the very fabric of America, pulling it back to its roots of justice and equality. The debate was about more than policy. It was about America's soul. What happened next wasn't just a clash of personalities, it was a battle for the future direction of the nation. This moment was the culmination of everything Crockett had fought for, her rise as an advocate, the way she had taken on the powerful and called them out. Barr, on the other hand, had long been a symbol of a Washington that didn't change, a political machine that crushed those who dared to challenge it. This debate wasn't just about two people, it was a reflection of the battle that was raging across the country, between those who wanted to preserve the old way of doing things and those who wanted a new America, one that valued every voice and every life. And it was happening now, in front of a captivated nation. The eyes of the country were on them. What happened next would reverberate across the political landscape, altering the course of the next election. Would America stay locked in the grip of an old, corrupt system, or would a new chapter be written, one where truth, justice, and accountability reigned? For Barr, this was just another day in the political game. But for Crockett, it was her moment to stand tall and speak for the future. The stakes had never been higher. The outcome of this confrontation wasn't just about one debate or one politician, it was about the very direction America would take in the years to come. As the audience waited in hushed anticipation, the tension in the room was palpable. No one knew what would happen next. But everyone knew this moment would be remembered, whether as a turning point for progress or another reminder of how far America still had to go. The entire political landscape was on the verge of shifting. Would Barr's outburst be the end of the story, or would Crockett's reply change the course of history? The stakes were higher than anyone could have imagined. Bill Barr's name had long been synonymous with power. As the Attorney General under President Donald Trump, Barr held one of the most influential positions in American politics. To the untrained eye, he was simply another figure in Washington, a man tasked with upholding the law. But those who dug deeper into his career saw something far darker, something more insidious, a man willing to bend, manipulate, and twist the law to serve the interests of the powerful. Barr's career was built on a foundation of self-righteousness, a sense of entitlement that allowed him to operate without fear of accountability. He had a long history of moving through the corridors of power, first serving under President George H. W. Bush as the 77th Attorney General, and later returning to the role in 2019 under the Trump administration. It was during his second stint that Barr truly revealed his nature, one defined by an unwavering loyalty to Trump and a willingness to sacrifice the principles of justice to protect the president at all costs. In the first year of his tenure, Barr had already begun to draw criticism for his controversial handling of the Mueller report. The investigation into Russian interference in the 2016 election, which had already uncovered a web of deceit and corruption, was something Barr seemed determined to downplay. While Special Counsel Robert Mueller's report documented numerous instances of possible obstruction of justice, Barr's summary to the public framed the entire investigation as a witch hunt, dismissing any serious wrongdoing. This, however, was only the beginning. Then came Barr's role in the clearing of Lafayette Square. In June 2020, federal forces, under Barr's direct orders, forcibly removed peaceful protesters from the area near the White House, allowing Trump to stage a photo op with a Bible in hand. The images, of military police firing rubber bullets and tear gas at unarmed citizens, became a symbol of the administration's disdain for the rights of everyday Americans. It was a move that seemed to solidify Barr's position as the enforcer of Trump's will, no matter the cost to the Constitution. This was Barr's fatal flaw, his unquestioning loyalty to a president who saw the law not as a safeguard of justice but as a tool for personal gain. He ignored the separation of powers, undermined the independence of the Department of Justice, and regularly bent the law to suit political agendas. To Barr, the law was malleable, subject to his whims and interpretations. His job was no longer to uphold justice but to protect the interests of the man in the Oval Office. It was in this context that Barr's arrogance began to take center stage. His decisions were no longer about the law, they were about power. Every move he made seemed to push the boundaries of what was acceptable, from his handling of the Mueller investigation to his defense of Trump's most egregious actions. He was the architect of a narrative where the rule of law was subjugated to the whims of political expediency. And while the American public was distracted by the chaos of an unprecedented administration, Barr pulled the strings behind the scenes, making sure that the system remained tilted in favor of those who could afford to play the game. Barr had long maintained a facade of calm, intellectual superiority. His polished exterior, his academic background, his authoritative demeanor, all of these were designed to give the impression of a man who had everything under control. But it was clear that this was a carefully constructed image, a mask that hid the deeper, more dangerous elements of his character. Beneath the surface, Barr's tenure as Attorney General revealed a man more concerned with wielding power than with administering justice. He didn't simply hold the reins of the justice system, he sought to bend it to his will. In public, Barr often spoke about the importance of law and order, of defending the principles that made America great. Yet, his actions told a different story. They showed a man who believed in law and order only as long as it suited his own interests and the interests of his political allies. His selective enforcement of the law, his dismissal of crucial investigations, and his defense of indefensible actions all painted a picture of a man who had lost sight of the very principles he claimed to uphold. His contradictions were glaring. He preached the importance of maintaining the integrity of American democracy, yet he stood by silently as that democracy was systematically undermined by his boss. He talked about the need to protect the sanctity of elections, yet he worked to discredit the very election results that ultimately led to Trump's defeat. Barr was a man of contradictions, a man who preached one thing while doing another, a man whose personal loyalties took precedence over the public good. Now, in front of the cameras, Barr was once again on display, this time facing off against someone who represented everything he had spent his career attempting to silence. Jasmine Crockett wasn't just a politician, she was a force of nature, a new breed of leadership that sought to undo the very damage men like Barr had inflicted on the system. And as Barr stood at the podium, seething with frustration, his sense of invincibility was beginning to crumble. The moment was coming when the curtain would fall on his unchecked reign of power. Barr's history was a tale of unchecked power. Will he continue to push the boundaries of the law, or is his reign about to come to an end? In that moment, facing a new generation of leaders like Crockett, the question wasn't just about the debate at hand, it was about the future of American democracy. Would Barr's version of justice survive, or would the values of truth, fairness, and accountability finally rise to take their rightful place? The tension between them was more than personal, it was a battle for the soul of the nation itself. Jasmine Crockett's story wasn't one of privilege, nor was it one of ease. It was a story carved out of struggle, sacrifice, and a deep-seated belief in the values that America promised but too often failed to deliver. Born to immigrant parents in the heart of Texas, Crockett grew up understanding the complexities of being both a product of a diverse, hard-working community and an outsider in a system that wasn't designed for people like her. She knew the sting of injustice early, how the world often saw her for her skin color more than her intellect, how her dreams were sometimes considered too ambitious, her voice too loud. But Crockett was never one to be silenced. Her parents, who had come to America with hopes of a better life, instilled in her an unwavering sense of justice and an even deeper sense of self-worth. They taught her that being marginalized didn't mean being powerless. The world might look at you differently, Jasmine, but that doesn't mean you have to look at yourself any differently, her mother would say, reminding her that the power to change the world was always within her grasp. From a young age, Crockett was keenly aware of the disparities that shaped her world. She excelled in school, using education as both a shield and a weapon. But no matter how well she did, she couldn't ignore the way people in positions of power seemed to look right past her community, disregarding their voices, their needs, and their humanity. This realization ignited something within her, a burning desire to speak up, to fight for those whose voices were drowned out by the noise of politics and privilege. Her journey into politics was not one of ambition for its own sake, but a natural extension of the values instilled in her. After graduating from law school, she worked as a public defender, representing the very people who had been neglected by the system. She saw firsthand the devastating consequences of a legal system that was supposed to protect the innocent but often punished the vulnerable. She defended individuals accused of crimes they didn't commit, fought for families whose lives were torn apart by policies they had no say in. Crockett quickly became known for her fierce advocacy and unshakable commitment to justice. In the courtroom, she wasn't just fighting for her clients, she was fighting for the dignity of those who had been cast aside by society. But it wasn't enough. Crockett knew that the real battle wasn't just in the courtroom, it was in the halls of power. The real change, she believed, was made when those who had been historically excluded from the political process stood up and demanded a seat at the table. So, in 2018, she decided to run for office. It wasn't a decision she made lightly. The political landscape was dominated by figures who had built careers on maintaining the status quo, on policies that marginalized the very communities Crockett had spent her life advocating for. Running for office meant risking everything, her career, her reputation, her personal life. But the more she thought about it, the more she realized she had no choice. There were lives on the line, lives that had been ignored by Washington for far too long. And if she didn't step up, who would? Her campaign wasn't about promises, it was about a vision of a country where the justice system served everyone, where the most vulnerable had a voice, and where the political process was accessible to all, not just the powerful few. She campaigned tirelessly, knocking on doors, speaking at rallies, and confronting the challenges that came with running as a political outsider. It wasn't easy. There were times when she wondered if she had the stamina to keep going. But the support she received from her community fueled her determination. People believed in her, and that belief kept her fighting. When she won her seat in Congress, it wasn't just a personal victory, it was a victory for all those who had been overlooked, for every marginalized group that had been told their voice didn't matter. But Crockett didn't rest on her laurels. She got to work immediately, advocating for policies that prioritized the needs of working-class families, fighting for criminal justice reform, and pushing back against the corporate interests that often dictated the direction of American politics. And it was in the halls of Congress where Crockett would truly come into her own. She was no longer just a voice for her constituents, she was a voice for the voiceless, the forgotten, the oppressed. Her speeches were not just calls to action, they were rallying cries for a new way forward. And with every debate, every vote, Crockett's reputation grew. She became known not just for her eloquence, but for her ability to challenge the powerful, to call out hypocrisy and demand accountability. But it wasn't easy. She faced resistance at every turn, not just from the opposition but from those within her own party who were more comfortable with the old ways of doing things. The pressure was relentless. She was young, she was ambitious, and most importantly, she was challenging a system that had been in place for decades. Yet Crockett never backed down. She knew what she was up against, but she also knew the stakes. The fight she was in wasn't just for her, it was for the future of the country. Her journey wasn't easy, but it's exactly what prepared her for this face-off with one of the most powerful figures in politics. Barr's arrogance, his disregard for justice, his willingness to manipulate the system, these were things Crockett had spent her entire career fighting against. And now, in this moment, she was about to stand up not just for her constituents, but for the future of America itself. This debate wasn't just about winning or losing, it was about everything she had worked for, everything she had fought for, and everything she believed in. In that moment, with all eyes on her, Jasmine Crockett was ready. Ready to face the political machine head-on and prove that the values of justice, equality, and truth could still win in a world dominated by power and privilege. The atmosphere in the room had shifted, thick with anticipation. The sharp click of the microphones, the rustle of papers, and the soft hum of the audience waiting in silence, everything seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the next move. What had started as a policy debate was now teetering dangerously close to something more personal, more visceral. Bill Barr, once the embodiment of control, was visibly rattled. His lips pressed into a thin line, his eyes narrowed with barely contained irritation. He had long prided himself on his calm, authoritative presence, but tonight, in the face of Jasmine Crockett's relentless scrutiny, the cracks were beginning to show. His voice, which had been measured and composed, now carried the sharp edge of frustration. "Enough with the theatrics, Congresswoman," Barr snapped, his words cutting through the room like a blade. He leaned forward, hands gripping the podium with a force that betrayed the tension building within him. "This isn't a stage for your political theater. We're talking about the rule of law, something you clearly don't understand." The insult hung in the air, and for a brief moment, Barr's smirk was the only thing visible in the harsh spotlight. He believed he had her, he believed that by goading her, he could knock Crockett off her game, make her flustered, make her look like the inexperienced politician he wanted her to be. But Crockett didn't flinch. She remained rooted in place, a calm and steady presence in the midst of Barr's storm. She didn't need to raise her voice to command the room. Her silence was deafening. Crockett's eyes never left Barr's, and for a moment, the space between them seemed to stretch. The audience could feel it, a pause that stretched just long enough to let the weight of Barr's words settle, and then, Crockett spoke. "Let me tell you something, Mr. Barr," she said, her tone calm but firm, a quiet strength that contrasted sharply with Barr's aggression. "The rule of law you talk about is only as good as the people who uphold it. And you? You've spent your entire career bending the law to serve the powerful while trampling on the rights of those who have no voice." The crowd shifted, a subtle murmur rippling through the audience. Barr's face flushed with rage, and his eyes flickered with a mix of disbelief and contempt. He had been challenged, and he didn't like it. "You have no idea what you're talking about," Barr fired back, his voice rising, the volume of his words a reflection of his growing anger. "You sit there, pretending to care about justice, when your entire political career is built on division. You think you're some savior for the oppressed, but you've done nothing but fuel the chaos." Barr's words were sharp, cutting, meant to sting. But Crockett didn't waver. She hadn't spent years battling against the very institutions Barr had helped build to let a few insults throw her off course. She remained steady, her face calm and composed, the unspoken message clear: she wouldn't be drawn into his games. "Chaos," she repeated, tilting her head slightly as if to challenge his definition. "The chaos you're talking about is the reality millions of people live in every day. You call it chaos when people demand accountability, when they fight for the dignity and respect they've been denied for generations. I call it justice. You can keep twisting the narrative, Mr. Barr, but the truth remains the same." Barr's face turned a deeper shade of red as he clenched his jaw, his frustration boiling over. He wasn't used to being challenged like this, not publicly, not by someone who wasn't afraid of him. For all his experience, all his power, Barr couldn't seem to control the one thing that had always been his greatest asset, his ego. But Crockett's response was like water on a fire. Her words were measured, precise, cutting straight to the heart of Barr's hypocrisy, all while maintaining an air of unshakable confidence. Her calmness was maddening to him. He couldn't get under her skin, couldn't provoke her. It made him seem small in comparison, like the bully who couldn't get a rise out of the one person they couldn't intimidate. As Barr's temper flared, it became clear, this wasn't just a debate, it was a battle for the soul of America. On one side stood the old guard, a man who had served a system that perpetuated inequality, silenced dissent, and protected the powerful. On the other stood a woman who refused to be silenced, who embodied the voice of those who had been ignored for far too long. Crockett wasn't just fighting for herself, she was fighting for the millions who had been left behind by a system that worked for the few, not the many. Barr's voice grew louder, his words more desperate. "You're not qualified to lecture me on law, Crockett. You're out of your depth. Then why are you so scared of me, Bill?" Crockett replied, her voice a smooth, almost disarming contrast to Barr's rising fury. "If I'm out of my depth, why are you getting so worked up? Is it because you know I'm right?" The words hit Barr like a punch to the gut. The crowd leaned forward, the weight of Crockett's question sinking in. Barr didn't have an answer. He could only stand there, his chest heaving, as the room filled with the electric tension of an undeniable truth. For the first time that night, it was Barr who looked rattled, while Crockett stood poised, every inch the leader, every word an indictment of the system he had spent his life defending. But this was far from over. The tension in the room was palpable, as if the very air had been thickened with the weight of the debate. Bill Barr, flushed with anger, stood there like a man who had just realized he had met his match, yet he refused to acknowledge it. His chest rose and fell with each breath, his knuckles still clenched around the podium, as if holding on to the remnants of his control. But in that moment, the storm of fury that had clouded his judgment seemed to dissipate, leaving only the echo of his arrogance. Across the room, Jasmine Crockett remained calm. In stark contrast to Barr's increasingly volatile outbursts, she stood with the stillness of someone who had already seen the outcome of this debate long before it began. Her hands rested loosely at her sides, her shoulders squared, her gaze unwavering. She had spent years battling against men like Barr, men who believed their power was unassailable, their positions beyond reproach. But in this moment, it was clear, she wasn't here to fight for the right to be heard, she was here to take down the lies that had kept so many silenced for so long. For a brief moment, the room seemed to freeze. The camera zoomed in on her, capturing the calm determination in her eyes, the quiet force that had already begun to reshape the atmosphere. Her face was unreadable, stoic, focused, yet there was something in the way she held herself that suggested the words she was about to deliver were not just another response. They were a reckoning. Barr had spent the better part of the debate trying to belittle her, trying to position himself as the authority on law and order, on justice. He thought himself untouchable, a man whose experience and intellect rendered others irrelevant. But he underestimated her. He didn't realize that it wasn't just her knowledge that made her formidable, it was the clarity of her moral vision. When she spoke again, it was with a deliberate, measured tone, as if each word was calculated to expose the truth beneath Barr's veneer of power. "You know, Bill," Crockett began, her voice carrying the weight of years of frustration, "I don't need to raise my voice to make my point. I don't need to shout, to belittle, or to insult. But let me tell you something, you are the embodiment of everything wrong with Washington. Everything wrong with this country." Her words were calm, almost disarming in their simplicity, but they carried an undeniable gravity. Barr's expression faltered for a split second, a crack in the armor he had so carefully built over the years. The room watched closely, sensing that something was about to change. Crockett didn't take her eyes off him. She let the silence linger for a moment, allowing the weight of her statement to sink in. "Your entire career has been about preserving the status quo. You talk about the law as if it's some sacred thing, something beyond reproach. But let's be clear, you don't care about the law. You care about protecting your own interests. You care about keeping the powerful in power and making sure that those who are already oppressed stay exactly where they are." Barr's jaw clenched, his hands tightening on the podium. But Crockett continued, her voice unwavering, each word cutting deeper into the persona he had spent a lifetime constructing. "You weren't appointed to protect the people, Bill. You were appointed to protect the system. You were appointed to defend a president who thought the law was a tool for his own benefit. You were appointed to make sure that the voices of those who have been silenced for generations, people like me, people like my community, never reached the halls of power. And for years, you've done exactly that." She paused, allowing the sting of her words to settle in the air. The room was silent now, all eyes on her. The audience could feel it, this wasn't just another moment in a debate. This was the moment that defined the entire confrontation. The moment that would be remembered long after the cameras stopped rolling. "Your hypocrisy is astounding," she continued, her tone cold but calculated. "You talk about law and order, but you didn't have the courage to stand up when your president was violating both. You didn't have the integrity to uphold the very laws you swore to protect. You sacrificed justice for power, for privilege, and now you stand here, lecturing me about the rule of law." The room held its breath. The tension was thick, and for the first time in the entire debate, Barr looked unsure. His lips parted, but no words came out. He knew he was being exposed, his arrogance, his complicity, his glaring contradictions laid bare before a live audience and an entire nation. Crockett took a step forward, her gaze never leaving Barr's face. "You've spent your career covering up the truth, twisting it to fit your narrative. But here's the truth you can't escape, Bill, the American people are done. They are done with the lies, done with the manipulation, done with the system that allows people like you to get away with it. They want justice. Real justice. They want accountability. And I will make sure they get it, whether you like it or not." The room fell into a deep, stunned silence. It wasn't just the words themselves, it was the way she delivered them. There was no anger in her voice, no desperation. It was simply the truth. The undeniable truth that Barr had spent his career trying to ignore. The truth that had now been laid bare, a truth so powerful that it seemed to reverberate through the very walls of the building. The audience sat in stunned silence, the impact of her words settling into their bones. Barr's face flushed, the color draining from his cheeks as Crockett's calm, confident demeanor seemed to loom larger with every passing second. And then, Crockett's final words came, as if to seal the deal. This isn't about you, Bill. This isn't about me. This is about the people who are counting on us to do the right thing. This is about restoring the law to its rightful place, as a beacon of justice, not a shield for corruption. And I will never back down from that fight. The room erupted in a mixture of stunned silence and scattered applause. Barr, his smug confidence now shattered, stood there, speechless, as Crockett calmly turned away, her eyes locked on the future. This was her moment. She had won, not just the debate, but the hearts and minds of a nation. The moment Crockett delivered her devastating response to Barr, the room seemed to hold its breath. The power of her words hung in the air, almost as if time had slowed down. But what happened next was even more explosive, an eruption that spread across the country, igniting a conversation that would last for days, weeks, and even months. The fallout was immediate. Social media exploded. Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, all of them were flooded with reactions, hashtags, and viral clips. Crockett's response became the talk of every corner of the internet. Within minutes, hashtag Crockett crushes Barr and hashtag Justice for America were trending worldwide. Her calm, confident demeanor and the truth in her words had struck a chord with millions. Memes flooded social media platforms, capturing the exact moment she delivered her mic drop line. One meme showed a still image of Barr's flustered face with the caption, "When you realize the truth hits harder than any punch you can throw." Another showed Crockett standing tall, her hand raised slightly, her gaze unwavering, with the words, "When your opponent brings the storm, and you just calmly change the weather." It was clear, Crockett had become a symbol, not just of political power, but of a new kind of leadership, one that didn't need to shout to be heard, one that let truth speak for itself. Twitter exploded with praise for the Congresswoman. Jasmine Crockett just redefined what it means to be a leader in this country. Calm, strategic, and unapologetically right, tweeted activist DeRay McKesson. Celebrities joined in, posting their admiration for Crockett's handling of Barr. Singer and activist John Legend tweeted, "When you stand on the right side of history, the truth comes out louder than any attack." Even the legendary Oprah Winfrey shared the clip of Crockett's response with the words, "When strength is in your voice, you don't need to raise it." Jasmine Crockett showed us all how to stand firm in our truth. In the political sphere, the reaction was just as intense. Political commentators and pundits across the spectrum weighed in, some in awe, others scrambling to make sense of the new reality Crockett had just created. On MSNBC, Chris Hayes called Crockett's response a masterclass in political poise. In that moment, Hayes continued, "Crockett didn't just take down Bill Barr, she showed America what true leadership looks like. Leadership rooted in truth, courage, and an unwavering commitment to justice." Even more conservative figures, who had spent years defending Barr's actions, couldn't ignore the force of Crockett's words. Fox News' Juan Williams, usually a staunch critic of progressives, tweeted, "Jasmine Crockett delivered a response that left no room for doubt, this was a victory for truth." The conversation wasn't just confined to social media. Late-night talk shows couldn't stop talking about it. Stephen Colbert, opening his monologue that evening, said, "Tonight, folks, we've got a showdown for the ages." Bill Barr thought he could bring the heat, but Jasmine Crockett turned up the thermostat to truth. His audience cheered, a clear sign of just how deeply the debate had resonated with the public. The cultural ripple effect was undeniable. Crockett's response to Barr became a flashpoint, an instant cultural reference that was shared in classrooms, coffee shops, and even living rooms. Memes weren't just fun jokes, they were cultural statements. They embodied the collective feeling of the country, especially among those who had felt ignored, dismissed, or marginalized for far too long. Crockett had tapped into something larger than just politics. She had touched the pulse of a nation desperate for change. Television broadcasts showed snippets of Crockett's mic drop moment looping in constant rotation. It was the defining image of the debate, the moment that people returned to again and again, trying to capture the power of her words, trying to understand how she had done it, how she had taken on one of the most powerful political figures of the past 3 decades and left him speechless. Public figures weren't just praising her, they were following her lead. A wave of solidarity surged from groups who had long been fighting for justice. Civil rights organizations, environmental groups, and those advocating for immigration reform all issued statements applauding Crockett. They saw in her not just a rising star, but a leader who had the ability to unite disparate movements under one common cause, justice for all. But it wasn't just the left that noticed. A growing faction of moderates and independents, who had been disillusioned with the polarized state of politics, began to speak out in her favor. Former Republican strategist Steve Schmidt tweeted, "I've disagreed with much of what Crockett stands for in the past, but today, she spoke truth to power in a way that should make us all rethink the role of leadership in this country." Behind the scenes, Crockett's team was inundated with calls. Political strategists, social media influencers, even former presidents reached out to offer their congratulations. It was clear, she had become a household name. But it wasn't just about the accolades. Crockett's moment of triumph had catapulted her into the center of a larger conversation. As the debate continued to dominate the news cycle, many speculated about what this would mean for the 2024 elections. Would this be the moment that launched Crockett into the national spotlight in a way no one had expected? Would her calm, reasoned approach to politics become the antidote to the chaos of the past few years? Would the country rally behind someone who, for once, stood as a symbol of integrity, fairness, and leadership? The media was abuzz with speculation. Is this the beginning of a new era in American politics? One headline asked. Jasmine Crockett, the next great political leader, another wondered. It was clear that the public had found in Crockett not just a representative of their values, but a leader they could believe in. The conversation shifted away from Barr's attack and towards the bigger picture, what the country had just witnessed. What happened in that room, when Crockett took on Barr and walked away victorious, was more than a political clash. It was a cultural moment, a turning point, a reminder that truth, integrity, and justice still had a place in the American political landscape. The world couldn't stop talking about what had just transpired, everyone had something to say. Some were in awe, others were in disbelief. But no one was indifferent. This was a moment that would echo through history. Jasmine Crockett had stepped into the political arena and changed the game. And as the dust settled, one thing was certain, the future had just begun to look very different. As the dust settled and the echoes of the debate began to fade, one thing was clear, Jasmine Crockett had emerged not just as a victorious politician, but as a symbol of something far greater. She had taken on one of the most powerful figures in American politics, Bill Barr, and with a calm, measured response, she had dismantled him piece by piece. But it wasn't just about winning the debate. It was about something much more profound. Crockett had stood for truth, integrity, and the values that America was founded upon. And in doing so, she had reminded the nation what it truly meant to lead. The spectacle of the debate had captured the attention of millions, but it was the message Crockett delivered that would resonate long after the cameras stopped rolling. Her victory wasn't just in the words she spoke, but in the way she carried herself, the grace, the composure, the unshakable commitment to justice. When Barr's arrogance collided with Crockett's unwavering dignity, it was clear who had won. She wasn't just standing up to Barr as a political opponent, she was standing up for the very soul of the country, for those who had been left behind by a system that often favored the powerful over the people. In her response, Crockett had reframed the debate. It wasn't just about a clash of personalities or partisan politics. It was a fight for something much larger, something that transcended the boundaries of party lines, something that united people of all backgrounds, beliefs, and values. Crockett's calmness in the face of Barr's fury was not just a strategic move, it was a reflection of the moral high ground she occupied. In that moment, her message wasn't just political, it was personal. It was a reminder that standing up for what's right, even when facing the most powerful forces in the world, was always worth it. Her victory was a triumph of resilience. In a world that often rewarded power and aggression, Crockett's quiet strength was a revelation. It was a reminder that leadership wasn't about dominating the conversation, it was about guiding it, about steering it in a direction that honored justice, truth, and the collective good. And by doing so with dignity, Crockett had shown the country what true courage looked like. But Crockett's message went beyond just political ideology. It was a universal truth: when you stand for what's right, when you choose integrity over convenience, when you refuse to be intimidated by the forces that seek to silence you, you will always come out on top. In a world that often values power over principle, Crockett had proven that moral clarity could, and would, overcome even the most entrenched systems of corruption. She had dismantled Barr not with anger or confrontation, but with the strength of truth, an enduring reminder that facts and justice are always stronger than lies and manipulation. The power of her response was a testament to the impact one person could have when they refused to compromise on their values. Crockett had stood in front of the most formidable figure in American politics, a man who had spent decades in the corridors of power, and she had refused to back down. It was a moment that had caught the imagination of the nation, a reminder that real change doesn't always come with loud protests or fiery speeches. Sometimes, it comes in the quiet moments of truth, in the words of someone who dares to speak plainly, even in the face of overwhelming opposition. In the end, truth and dignity will always triumph over arrogance and corruption, Crockett had said. And those words reverberated long after the debate was over. They became a rallying cry for those who had long been fighting against a system that seemed to reward the corrupt while punishing the just. They became a beacon of hope for those who had been silenced by the weight of power, for those who had been told their voices didn't matter. As the nation reflected on what had transpired, the lesson was clear: the fight for justice was not a battle for a single person or a single moment, it was a battle for the soul of the nation itself. Crockett's victory was proof that, even in the face of the greatest challenges, standing firm in your convictions could lead to change. It wasn't about one debate, one person, or one victory. It was about something much larger, the undeniable truth that when integrity, justice, and dignity lead the way, they have the power to change the course of history. And so, as Crockett looked forward, her mission had only just begun. Her victory wasn't the end, it was the beginning of a movement, one that would continue to challenge the entrenched systems of power and push for a future where justice truly prevailed. The world had seen what happened when a single individual refused to back down, when they stood firm in their belief that right would always prevail. And that belief, Crockett's belief, was now shared by millions across the country, inspiring them to stand up, to speak out, and to never stop fighting for what was right. In the end, the real victory wasn't in the words of the debate, it was in the hearts of the people who had seen that truth, integrity, and dignity could not only survive in America, but could thrive. As the debate came to a close, one thing was undeniably clear: Jasmine Crockett had not just won a debate, she had won a moral victory that will echo across the political landscape for years to come. That moment when she stood tall, unwavering in the face of Bill Barr's arrogance, wasn't just a personal triumph, it was a victory for the very values that this nation was founded upon: truth, justice, and the unwavering commitment to what's right. The shockwave of her response to Barr continues to resonate far beyond the confines of that debate hall. It has sparked a conversation, reignited hope, and reminded us all of the power of one voice standing against the powerful. But this victory isn't just about one debate, it's a call to action for all of us. If you believe, like Crockett, that standing up for what's right is more important than power or privilege, then this movement for justice needs you. This is our time to take the lessons from that moment and apply them to our own lives. So, if you're ready to be part of the change, to stand up and speak truth to power, we invite you to join us. Subscribe now, share this message with the world, and let's continue to fight for justice, dignity, and the values that make us stronger together. This battle is far from over. In fact, it's only just begun. Be part of the change. Share this video. And together, let's ensure that truth, dignity, and justice always prevail.